Hi everyone, welcome to the speed learning series of ServiceNow Third-party Risk Management. In every session of the series, we share with you quick insights into must-know features of third-party risk management. In this session, I will specifically focus on third-party risk scoring. So without further ado, let's get started. Third-party risk management is vital to any organization's broader risk and resiliency strategy. As reliance on external vendors grows, so do risks, operational, regulatory, reputational, and cyber related. It's not just about compliance, it's about protecting trust, enabling continuity, and ensuring long term success. In earlier speed learning sessions, we covered how ServiceNow helps automate assessments and manage third party risks. Today, we are focusing specifically on third-party risk scoring and how it provides real-time visibility into where risks exist, helping risk managers make smarter, faster decisions. We will walk through a demo to bring these concepts to life and close with some practical takeaways. Let's get started. Here's what we'll be covering in the session on third-party risk scoring. We'll start with a brief introduction to set the context for why third-party risk scoring is such a critical capability in today's risk management landscape. Next, we'll dive into the third-party risk scoring methodology. We'll break down how risk scores from individual assessments roll up into a consolidated third-party risk rating and how we can capture the granularity of risk at both the engagement and assessment levels. We'll also decode exactly how scores, ratings, and values tie together from individual assessment to third party. From there, we'll talk about the aggregators of risk rating, risk scoring rules. And this includes a detailed discussion of risk areas, components, and criteria that deploy the aggregation logic in the calculations. Then we'll walk through risk scoring calculations in detail, including how the system calculates risk ratings at the assessment level, engagement level, and finally at the overall third party or subsidiary level. We'll also take a quick look at the user personas involved in the risk scoring process to help frame the roles and responsibilities. After that, we'll go into the demo where we will use a generic example to uncover how all of this works to provide you with the needed clarity of the inner workings of the risk scoring. And finally, we will close the key takeaways and resources so you can start to apply this in your own implementations. Before we dive into third party risk scoring, we highly recommend having a basic understanding of the ServiceNow third party risk management architecture and data model, along with a high level overview of its workflows. If you're new to this, there are several speed learning sessions and best practice webinars available on the official community portal that can help you quickly get up to speed. I encourage you to take some time to review those resources before taking a deeper look at the risk scoring. In addition, having a general understanding of risk intelligence or external monitoring will come handy. This is because risk intelligence plays a key role in influencing the risk scoring. And finally, at the time of this recording, third party risk management leverages classic assessments for conducting the assessments. Looking ahead, ServiceNow plans to offer the Smart Assessment Engine as an option. Regardless of which assessment engine you use, the third party risk scoring methodology itself is expected to remain largely the same. That said, we strongly recommend that you take the time to familiarize yourself with how classic assessments, that is, the service and assessments capability, work within the ServiceNow platform. Having that foundation will make it much easier to understand the mechanics of the third party risk scoring as we go through this session. Risk scoring is a structured way to assess and quantify the risks that third parties may introduce to our organization. It assigns risk scores and ratings based on key factors like their security posture, financial health, compliance track record, and potential impact on our operations if things go wrong. So, why is this important? There are several key reasons. First, it helps us detect risks early, which means we can focus on targeted mitigation before small issues grow into larger threats. Second, it ensures we focus our resources where they matter most. Instead of spreading efforts thin, we prioritize high risk areas. Third, it strengthens our resilience and minimizes disruption to the business by proactively addressing risks. Fourth, it helps us stay ahead of compliance and regulatory demands, reducing the likelihood of surprises or penalties. Fifth, by streamlining our risk management processes, we can cut costs and improve operational efficiency. And finally, strong risk scoring supports smarter decision making and builds trust with key stakeholders, showing that we are managing risk responsibly. Ultimately, risk scoring gives us a systematic, consistent, and proactive approach to managing third party risks, helping protect both our business and our reputation. Understanding the third party risk scoring methodology. The next couple of slides cover what I like to call the building blocks of third party risk scoring. Before we get into the specifics of how the scoring calculations work, I want to walk you through the journey of a risk rating, from individual assessments all the way to a consolidated third party risk rating. Fortunately, it is a straightforward progression once you map it out. We all know that effective third party risk management depends on visibility. But how do businesses actually create that visibility when dealing with third parties and ongoing engagements? While there are certainly many approaches, I believe the foundation of all of them is assessments. It's through targeted assessments, whether that's questionnaires, document reviews, or even on site evaluations, that organizations uncover the real risks posed by a third party. Now, it's true that internal assessments can help define inherent risk based on what the business already knows, but these are typically used to prioritize which third parties to assess and which specific assessments to send. It's the external assessments that reveal the actual risks by validating control, uncovering gaps, and driving actionable insights that lead to understanding the residual risk. Alongside these internal and external assessments, ServiceNow also incorporates risk intelligence, externally sourced data similar to credit scores for individuals that provides ongoing real time insights into the reliability and trustworthiness of third parties. This intelligence enriches risk scoring by capturing dynamic factors outside your organization's immediate control. This is what enables informed decisions around onboarding, contract terms, and mitigation strategies. In ServiceNow, third-party risk management solution, you can view risk scores and ratings at multiple levels, depending on the insight you need. As a third-party risk manager, you can look at risk at the assessment level, but the solution also lets you roll up the ratings from one or more assessments to the engagement level, representing the ongoing business relationship. And from there up to the third party level, or even a subsidiary if applicable. How the risk ratings at the various levels, assessment, engagement, third party, and subsidiaries are calculated and consolidated is exactly what we'll be unpacking in this session. Stay tuned for the inner workings of these calculations. But know that this flexible roll up approach is engineered to give you the clarity you need on where the risk truly resides, whether it's within a specific domain, a particular engagement, or an entity wide concern. And that's important because not all risks are created equal. Some risks arise because of how you engage with a third party, not just because who the third party is. This layered risk scoring model allows you to tailor your mitigation strategies and focus your resources where they'll have the greatest impact. Moving on, now that we have covered how consolidating and rolling up risk scores and ratings provides tremendous value to the third party risk manager, let's take a closer look at the granularity of risk ratings offered within this framework. As a reminder, these consolidated consolidations and roll-ups flow all the way from individual assessments to the third party or subsidiary level, if applicable. I encourage you to think of this roll-up as both flat and hierarchical in nature. What do I mean by that? Well, third parties or their subsidiaries may be directly assessed through third party risk assessments. Additionally, your business may conduct several engagements with that third party or subsidiary. These engagements can also be risk assessed, which means the results roll up indirectly to the third party or subsidiary, unveiling the true risk of that partnership. Depending on the assessment outcomes, the risk may be high, low, or somewhere in between. But either way, this is invaluable information at both the engagement and third party levels. Now, while this hierarchy between third party subsidiaries, engagements, and assessments is key, it's just the beginning. The granularity of risk ratings runs deeper, and what we have seen so far is only the tip of the iceberg. Let's unpack that further. The engagement risk rating, the engagement risk rating is generated from two kinds of ratings derived from assessments. Engagement assessment rating from assessments run directly on the engagement itself, element assessment rating from assessments run on elements associated with that engagement. To give this some context, what do I mean by elements? After performing an internal assessment of a third party, risk managers often need to gather more detailed information about the relationship. They might send a specific questionnaire to the third party to uncover entities that will play a role in delivering that engagement. For example, a data center that the third party uses to store or manage data, a manufacturing site that they rely on for product assembly. These are captured in the third party risk lifecycle as elements, and importantly, they may also be individually risk assessed. These targeted assessments generate an element assessment risk rating, and both this and the engagement assessment rating roll up to form the overall engagement risk rating. Finally, let's talk about assessment ratings themselves. As we have established, assessments are the building blocks of your entire third party risk management program, and their risk scores and ratings eventually roll up to engagements and third parties. But assessments themselves have layers. In ServiceNow's third party risk management, the assessments are made up of questionnaires and document requests. It is a best practice to design focused, outcome driven questionnaires aligned to key risk areas like cybersecurity, financial health, compliance, anti bribery, operational resilience, and so on. This modular approach helps avoid sending massive, unfocused questionnaires and gives you more precise insight. And here's the key advantage. ServiceNow's TPRM allows you to generate risk ratings at the questionnaire level, breaking the overall assessment rating down even further. This means you can easily identify which specific questionnaire uncovered the critical risk that require action. Likewise, document requests another type of questionnaire help gather supporting documentation from third parties or subsidiaries. These requests also generate individual risk scores that roll up to the assessment rating. So, in summary, the roll up structure starts at the questionnaire and document request level, flows up to the assessment rating, then to the engagement rating, and finally to the third party or subsidiary rating. As a reminder, throughout this entire structure, risk intelligence complements the assessment data by adding continuous external insights, enhancing your ability to detect emerging risks early and adjust your risk ratings accordingly. This layered, granular structure gives you unparalleled visibility and flexibility in how you manage third party risk. Calculating the assessment VRA risk rating. Let's now take a closer look at how scores and risk ratings are calculated for a single individual assessment VRA record. The official naming convention of the VRA record itself is third party risk assessment. But to keep it simple, I will refer to it as an assessment record. And based on the context of the assessment record, I will also refer to it as an assessment record for third party as third party risk assessment, or an assessment record for an engagement as engagement risk assessment, or assessment record for an entity as element risk assessment. But know that I'm referring to it as such to emphasize on the context I'm speaking for. Again, in reality, every assessment in the system is just a third party risk assessment because it's stored in the same table. The assessment is applied to a third party or engagement or entity. That's all about it. All right. The process of assessments, VRA risk rating methodology, follows a structured, layered approach moving from individual metrics or questions all the way up to the overall assessment. To help simplify this, we can break it down into four key pillars: M, C, Q, and A. And we must build this methodology from left to right. First, we start with M for metrics or question. This is the most granular level. Here we are talking about individual questions with a questionnaire instance. These questions are what the assessor responds to. All scoreable metrics are normalized. Metrics flagged as scored normalize responses to 0 or 100 only. Those not flagged as scored metrics normalize response using a formula. It is possible to take complete control of the normalization process for choice and multiple choice or multiple selection metrics that are evaluated using a formula by a feature called maximum normalization. We will double click into that as we progress in the session. Before moving on, I would like to emphasize a little bit more on the importance of weight in determination of the normalized value for a metric or question where scored response is true, meaning the normalized response will be 0 or 100 only. The weight also plays a significant role in determination of the end normalized value or the ultimate normalized value, if you will. So it is the weighted average of that particular metric that is then applied to the metric normalized value. So in this case, 100, if the answer is correct, 100 will be multiplied by the weighted average of that metric to derive the ultimate or the end normalized value. Next, we have C for category. Categories are essentially groupings of related metrics. By grouping related content, we can apply specific weightings that reflect the importance of that category in the overall context. of the assessment. Each category produces two values. One, a rating, score, or simply a raw number. Two, and a risk rating like medium, high, or low based on that score. Again, weights play a key role in ensuring that higher priority categories have more influence on the overall result. Then we move up to Q for questionnaire. A questionnaire instance consists of one or more categories. When calculating the questionnaires overall score, that is risk score and risk rating, the weighted average of the categories are taken into account. This ensures that individual categories with greater risk significance have the appropriate influence on the questionnaires outcome. Finally, A for assessment. The assessment or VRA can include one or more questionnaires as well as document request. The questionnaire rating calculation takes into account the individual risk ratings from questionnaires and document request. The calculation also factors in weighting as applicable to questionnaire and document request based on their risk area or domain assignments. We will understand risk area or domain concept later, but know that it influences the assessment's risk rating calculation at the end. So, in summary, we start from individual questions, roll them up into categories, combine those into questionnaires, and finally aggregate everything into overall assessment, guided by scoring calculations. This structured hierarchical approach allows for consistency, flexibility, and transparency in how scores and risk ratings are derived, giving you confidence in the decisions you are making based on these assessments. Before we close this section, a quick but important clarification. What's the difference between a questionnaire and a questionnaire instance? Think of a questionnaire as a template or definition. When it's deployed in an assessment, it becomes a questionnaire instance. It's the instance that gets answered, scored, and rolled up into the assessment score and risk rating. That distinction is essential for fully understanding the scoring process we just explored. Let's now unpack the anatomy of assessment risk rating, essentially, how different pieces of the scoring process work together to produce the final risk rating of an assessment. The big blue boxes on the extreme left simply represent the system of record. Hang tight, I will fill you in with more details on it on the next slide. What you see on the right side are the key building blocks. Think of them as the formulas or equations that the system uses under the hood to calculate the scores and ratings on the left. We'll go step by step. Question rating. We start at the most granular level, the question. Each question's rating is calculated based on the response selected by the assessor. The configuration of the metric defines the correct answer. The calculation of rating is informed by the metric scale definition and the minimum and maximum values that are associated with the metric. Some questions cannot be scored, but those which can be are included in the calculation. Some questions might be informational only, and those won't be scored. Question percentage contribution. Next, we determine how much each question contributes to its category. Not all questions are created equal. Some might carry more weight because they are more critical to risk. This calculation takes both the question's weight and the overall weight of category into account. This results in percent contribution of each question in relative to the category. Question normalized value. Then we normalize that contribution. We multiply the question rating by its percent contribution and by a constant value of 100. Why do we do this? It makes it easier to compare questions even when they have different weights or scores on a common scale. Note: a metric configured as scored will normalize the response to 0 or 100 only based on the correct answer configuration. If not, the formulae for question rating, question percent contribution, and normalized value in EQ1, EQ2, and EQ3 will apply to evaluate the normalized score of a metric. Please note the footnote at the bottom of the slide is crucial to the calculation blueprint. Category rating. Now that we have handled the individual questions, we move up to the category level. The category rating is calculated by adding together all the normalized values of its questions. This numeric score is then translated into qualitative risk rating, like low, medium, or high, using the associated risk rating scale. Category normalized value. Just like with questions, we normalize category rating by considering the weight of each category. The calculation basically is a multiplication of category rating with weighted average of the category. This enables comparison between different categories, especially when some are more important to the risk context than others. Questionnaire quantitative score. The normalized scores of all categories roll up to form the overall quantitative score of the questionnaire. This score represents the risk score for the questionnaire, and from this, the qualitative risk rating of the questionnaire is derived. The actual low, medium, or high risk designation you'll see on the questionnaire instance. Document requests have a different behavior or behave slightly differently. Instead of a quantitative calculation, their qualitative rating is based on the response to the default question. Basically, do you have this document? No numeric score drives this. However, assessors can override the risk rating if they feel the situation warrants it. Assessment rating. Finally, everything rolls up to the assessment rating, the weighted average of all questionnaires and document requests within each risk area is calculated. The system uses the risk area scoring method defined in the scoring rule, specifically third-party risk scoring rule, to determine how the ratings of questionnaire and document request of a particular risk area should be treated when calculating the final assessment rating as a weighted average. In summary, we start from question responses, factor in weighting at both the question and category levels, normalize those values to ensure fair comparisons, aggregate up to questionnaire scores, and finally compute the assessment rating based on risk areas and predefined scoring methods as configured in the applicable scoring rule. This layered calculation structure ensures that your assessment ratings are accurate, meaningful, and actionable. We will dive deeper into the role of risk areas and scoring rules later, so stay with me. Now that we have explored the methodology of how the assessment risk rating is calculated, let's take this a step further by breaking down where each of these calculations lives in the system. This slide gives you a behind the scenes view of the specific system of record, tables, and attributes responsible for storing or generating these values. This view is critical, especially for those of you involved in reporting, integrations, or troubleshooting. Let's walk through it from the ground up, mirroring the calculation flow we saw earlier. Starting at the question level, the question rating for each question is dynamically calculated based on the response given by the assessor. This question rating itself isn't stored in the database. It's computed on the fly, but the response to the question is stored in the metric result, ASMT underscore metric underscore result table. Similarly, the question percent contribution is also dynamic, calculated based on the question's weight within its category and the category's overall weight. However, we do not store the question, however, we do store the question normalized value in the metric result, ASMT underscore metric underscore result table in the normalized value field. This normalized value lets us compare questions that have different weights and scores on a common scale. Again, as a reminder, a metric configured as scored will normalize the response to 0 or 100 only based on the correct answer configuration. If not, the formulae for question rating, question percent contribution, and normalized value in EQ1, EQ2, and EQ3 will apply to evaluate the normalized score of a metric. Please note the footnote at the bottom of the slide is crucial to the calculation blueprint. Next, at the category level, the category rating, the quantitative score, is stored in the assessment category results, ASMT underscore category underscore result table under the rating field. Its corresponding risk rating, meaning the qualitative rating like low, medium, or high, is derived using the risk rating scale defined in assessment setup. Similarly, the category normalized value is stored in assessment category result, ASMT underscore category underscore result table under normalized value, giving us consistency for rolling up to higher levels. Then at the questionnaire level, the questionnaire quantitative score or the overall risk score for that questionnaire is stored in questionnaire or assessment instance, ASMT underscore assessment underscore instance table in the risk score field. Just like at the category level, this quantitative risk score is converted to a qualitative risk rating using the risk rating scale in assessment setup. Document requests are a bit special. Each document request contains a default question. Do you have document? The assessor responds with yes, no, or not applicable, or leaves it unanswered. The system then maps this response to a risk rating, yes equal to low, no or unanswered equal to high, not applicable equal to moderate. Note that this is qualitative only. There is no numeric score driving this out of the box. Finally, at the overall assessment level, the final qualitative risk rating for the assessment record itself is stored in the third-party risk assessment, SN underscore VDR underscore risk underscore ASMT underscore assessment table under risk rating. And importantly, the risk rating uses values, the risk rating scale uses the values defined for the risk rating scale in the administration GRC choices, where the choice category is risk rating. This is different from the risk rating scale that questionnaire and category use for deriving risk rating. The logical answer to this difference is that the previously discussed risk rating scale facilitates conversion from scores to risk rating, but the one that assessment uses for deriving risk rating is not based on scores, but actually just a mapping to risk rating values post the weighted average of questionnaire and document request as discussed in the previous slide. Why is this important? Knowing where these scores and ratings are stored and whether they are calculated dynamically or persisted in the database is crucial for creating advanced reports, designing integrations with other systems, troubleshooting unexpected results, performing audits or compliance reviews. So this view complements the scoring methodology, we discussed previously by giving you clear visibility into the system of record, helping you understand not just how the numbers are generated, but exactly where to find them. Before we move on, I want to take a moment to highlight that this next slide is essentially a summary of everything we have discussed so far regarding how assessment risk ratings are calculated in the system. Think of this slide as your offline reference, something you can come back to later for a quick refresher, or if you need to explain this to someone else in your team. We have covered how individual questions contribute to scores, how these roll up into categories, how questionnaires combine those categories, and finally, how everything comes together into the assessment risk rating. We have also explored the system of record, the specific tables and fields involved, so that you're equipped to find and interpret the data behind these calculations. Everything you see summarized here follows that left to right flow we discussed previously. MCQA, from metric to category to questionnaire to assessment. If you are involved in reporting integrations or process troubleshooting, this slide should be particularly helpful. Keep this handy for reference, especially when working with technical teams or configuring reports. Okay, I'll move us forward. All right, as we wrap up the topic of calculating the assessment VRA risk rating, I want to take a moment to highlight an important point. Not every question type contributes to scoring. As a quick reminder, every question in the system is configured with four key elements: a scale definition, a weight, cor- correct answer, and an order. A scale definition determines of possible response is higher or lower value better. Weight is used to influence how much that particular question contributes to the overall score. Correct answer, so the system knows which response is preferred, however, only applicable to scored metrics which normalize to 0 or 100. Basically, metrics which are actually flagged with scored equal to true, and, and an order which controls how the questions appear to the responder. Now, which question types are actually scored or contribute to the score? Scored question types include checkbox, Boolean, choice, number, percentage, Likert scale, numeric scale, custom, template, image scale, yes or no, multiple selection, ranking. Not scored question types include attachment, date or time, and string. When it comes to scoring, scoreable questions are those that normalize to a score. Both scored, where scored uh, checkbox is equal to true or is selected, and not scored questions. Not scored are the ones where scored checkbox is not selected, basically value is false. Both of these will normalize to a score, but how they achieve the normalized value is, is what is the primary difference. Scored questions always normalize to 0 or 100. Not scored questions leverage calculations blueprint, equations EQ1, EQ2, and EQ3 to normalize. The calculations blueprint ultimately leads to question rating, category rating, and the assessment's risk rating. Non-scorable questions may be included for context guidance or to gather information that's valuable, but do not directly impact the risk scoring. These won't show up in the scoring calculations. Knowing this distinction helps you as you review or design questionnaires because you will understand which parts of the assessment drive risk outcomes and which parts are purely informational. Thus, this clarity ensures that scoring remains meaningful and focused, aligned with your organization's risk evaluation strategies. Maximum normalization of metrics. This is a completely optional configuration. It is only applicable to data types of choice and multiple selection. It is only applicable to metrics that adopt scale definition to normalize values, and scored checkbox is therefore not selected. The maximum normalization allows the normalization value to be measured on a uniform scale of 0 to 100, thus normalizing values for these data types. Note the formulae for maximum normalization for choice and multiple selection are unique and must be adopted in verification of normalized values. Let's quickly walk through some of these examples. In example 1, maximum normalization is not applied. Based on the calculations, when dog is selected a response among the offered choices, the, the score, that is normalized score, evaluates to 0 for that response. In contrast, in example 2, when dog is selected response among the same offered choices, the score, that is normalized score, evaluates to 33 for the same question response. This is because the normalized score is harmonized on a scale of 0 to 100. This is a better score for the scoring calculations than 0 as the score. In example 3, the formula changes to practically apply to a data type of multiple selection. That's it. When dog and cat are selected responses among the offered options, the score, that is the normalized score, evaluates to 47 for that response. Again, this is because the normalized score is harmonized on a scale of 0 to 100. This concept is simply to provide consistent results to normalized scores for these data types. This improves the scoring calculations by making it harmonized and more predictable. That's all the purpose. Please take time to dig deeper into this concept with these examples and come up with maximum normalization input values for choices and multiple selection data types if you desire to implement it for your questionnaires. Again, this is completely optional but highly recommended if you feel you are experiencing any inconsistent results when using these data types. I will not really implement this for our demonstration later. However, the idea is to familiarize you with this concept so you can apply it for your questionnaires if needed. The crucial role of components and risk areas in risk scoring. Now that we have explored how assessment risk rating is calculated, it's important to understand how those individual assessment results connect to the bigger picture of third-party risk management. Broadly speaking, the risk scoring methodology doesn't stop at generating scores for individual assessments. Its true power comes from how those individual ratings roll up to form a broader, more strategic view of third party risk. And that's where two key frameworks come into play: components and risk areas. These are the heart of the third party risk management process and the absolutely critical in driving meaningful, actionable risk insights. Let's first talk about the components framework. Components represent the who or what you're assessing. This could be external assessments, subsidiaries, engagements, and external risk intelligence. External assessments. These are the third party risk assessments initiated to evaluate the third party itself, meaning your vendor or partner organization as a whole. Subsidiaries. These are specific business units or subsidiaries of the third party that may be involved depending on the nature of your relationship. Engagements. These are the specific partnerships or business activities that you are conducting with the third party. Engagements themselves actually have two layers: engagement risk assessments and elements. Engagement risk assessments. Risk assessments specifically focused on evaluating the risks related to that particular engagement. Elements. Elements are the external organizations that an engagement relies on to provide goods, services, or support. These organizations can include facilities, products, individuals, or any other external entity that can be assessed or that can access the engagement systems, data, or facilities. Just like external assessments, elements are risk assessed using the same method to identify risks related to those external dependencies. This structure allows you to get both a high level view of engagements risk and a granular view of risk associated with a particular part of the engagement. And sometimes external intelligence. This represents external data sources that you can leverage to supplement your internal risk assessments with broader intelligence. This framework helps pinpoint where the risks are coming from in context of the partnership. Are there are they at the third party level, subsidiaries, or specific to the engagement at hand? Now, the risk areas framework represents what kind of risks you are concerned with. These are the risk domains you have chosen to evaluate. For example, cybersecurity risks: can we trust them with our confidential data? Financial risk: can they meet their financial obligations to us? Compliance risk: are they adhering to laws and regulations relevant to this partnership? Using these two frameworks together gives you powerful clarity, not just how risky a third party might be overall, but also where that risk sits and what kind of risk it is. For example, assessing a vendor's financial stability gives us confidence they can meet our obligations. Assessing their cybersecurity posture builds trust that they'll protect sensitive information. Assessing their compliance practices provides assurance they can meet relevant legal and regulatory requirements. By combining the components with risk areas, the third party risk managers can provide much more than a generic high or low risk score. They can provide targeted, actionable insight on exactly what needs to be addressed and where. That's the power of structured hierarchical risk scoring combined with these two frameworks. It transforms assessments from activities into decision enabling tools. Let's now dive deeper into each of these frameworks to see how they work in practice. Now that we have introduced components and risk areas at a high level, let's take a deeper look at components, which help define where those risks are coming from. In the context of ServiceNow's third-party risk management solution, components represent the core entities within the third-party ecosystem that are individually evaluated for risk. These are the structural touchpoints in your external relationships where risks can originate or concentrate. Each component contributes a unique perspective to your overall risk posture. For example, the risk posed by an engagement might be very different from that of a third party's subsidiary, or the insights surfaced through external monitoring. Out of the box, ServiceNow provides four predefined and fixed components: third party risk assessments, engagements, subsidiaries, and risk intelligence. Third-party risk assessments, as previously described, these are direct assessments conducted on the third party itself, giving you insight into their practices and posture. Engagements, these represent specific business relationships or use cases. You might work with a vendor on multiple engagements, each carrying different set of risks. Subsidiaries, these are branches or entities under the third party which may require independent evaluation depending on their role in the relationship. Risk intelligence, this includes externally sourced insights such as financial health, credit ratings, or cybersecurity posture, providing a real time lens into third party reliability. Each of these components is scored independently using their own underlying assessments and data sources. The results are then aggregated and rolled up to form a consolidated third party risk rating. This gives risk managers a more layered and contextual understanding of where the risks lie, whether it's in a specific subsidiary, a particular engagement, or flagged by external signals. A quick note: while these four components are fixed, you can't rename them or add new ones. You can tailor how each one is evaluated using a configuration called component criteria, which we'll explore on the next slide. So, to sum it up, components help answer the question, where is the risk coming from? And offer the structural foundation for building a comprehensive, multi-dimensional risk rating for your third parties. Now that we understand what components are and how they represent the foundational elements of your third-party risk landscape, let's take a closer look at how they are actually used within the ServiceNow third-party risk management solution. Specifically, how their individual risk ratings are aggregated through component criteria. To begin with, once a questionnaire or document request template is applied to a third party, a subsidiary, or an engagement, or an element, it becomes a live assessment. These assessments are what begin generating risk ratings, which are then organized and interpreted through the lens of components. As you may recall from earlier components and risk areas discussion, ServiceNow supports a fixed set of predefined components. Third-party risk assessments, VRAs, direct evaluations of the third party, subsidiaries, organizational entities under the third party involved in the relationship, engagements representing specific business activities or contracts, risk intelligence, externally sourced indicators of vendor trustworthiness. For engagements, the framework introduces additional granularity through subcomponents, engagement risk assessments, assessments specific to the engagement, element risk assessments focused on supporting entities like principals, products, facilities, or other external organizations involved in the delivery of that engagement. With the exception of risk intelligence, all these components derive their scores and ratings from assessments. Risk intelligence, on the other hand, gathers scores from external providers like credit or cybersecurity vendors, and ServiceNow converts those into standardized risk ratings. These scores are still part of the overall risk picture and roll up to the risk intelligence component and ultimately to the third party or subsidiary risk rating. Now, the key question is, how do we control how much each component contributes to the overall risk rating, and which components contribute at all? That's where component criteria come in. Component criteria are specialized configurations that define which components should be included in the risk scoring, the weight each component should carry, how important it is, and the scoring method, whether to use the min, max, or average value from the selected components. These criteria contain a copy of the component definitions, including default weights and scoring methods. The good news is those defaults can be overridden to reflect your organization's specific risk priorities and risk appetite. This flexibility means you're not just capturing risk, you're prioritizing and aggregating it in a way that mirrors your real world business concerns. So, in summary, component criteria are what make it possible to translate individual component level risk scores into a single unified third party risk rating. They enable you to fine tune your scoring model, ensuring that every relevant factor, whether from direct assessments, supporting elements, or external intelligence, is accurately represented in your risk picture. Now that we have introduced the broader context of components, let's shift our focus to the second major framework that drives the risk scoring methodology: risk areas. Risk areas, sometimes also referred to as risk domains, represent the key categories of risk that organizations should evaluate when dealing with third parties. They provide a structured way of thinking about what types of risks we are really talking about when we assess a vendor or partner. Why is this important? Well, not every third party relationship exposes your business to the same kinds of risks. Some may handle sensitive customer data, others may provide critical services that, if disrupted, could seriously impact your operations. By clearly defining risks areas, you are able to direct your assessments to focus on what matters most for your organization. For example, let's say you have a third party that stores or processes sensitive personal data. Naturally, you'd want to assess them specifically for their security practices. On the other hand, if you're working with a particular partner providing financial consulting, anti bribery and corruption may be more relevant. ServiceNow provides a set of sample risk areas out of the box, but you can fully customize this list to reflect your organization's risk landscape. Some examples of common risk areas include anti bribery and corruption, compliance risk, security risk, financial risk, reputational risk, environmental risk, and resiliency risk. Remember, these are starting points. You should adjust or expand them based on your unique business needs and regulatory environment. In summary, risk areas help give structure and focus to your third party assessments, ensuring that you're not missing key risks and that your risk ratings align with your real business concerns. In the next slide, we'll build further on this by looking at how criteria help you apply these risk areas more effectively and how they play into the scoring methodology. Now that we have defined what risk areas are and how they help structure our understanding of third party risk, let's take a look at how they are actually used in ServiceNow's third party risk management solution. The life cycle of a risk area begins at the template level. Risk areas are first applied to questionnaire templates and document request templates. This ensures that the questions you send to third parties are already aligned with the risk domains you care about, such as security, compliance, or financial health. Once those templates are used to create actual assessments, whether for a third party, a subsidiary, an engagement, or an entity, the results can now be interpreted through the lens of risk areas. So, in effect, you are categorizing risk data right at the source. But assigning risk areas alone isn't enough to support roll up, roll up scoring. To project risk ratings upward from assessment level to the third party or engagement level, we need to define how each risk area contributes to the overall risk picture. Risk areas are specialized configurations that define which risk areas should be included in the risk scoring. A weight representing the significance of the risk area in your evaluation. A scoring method, min, max, or average, that defines how multiple risk ratings within that area should be consolidated. It's important to note that risk area criteria don't just reference definitions, they clone them. These clones inherit default weights and scoring methods from the original risk area definitions, but you can override those defaults when configuring the criteria. When assessments, whether for a third party engagement or element, are completed, their risk ratings are processed through the risk area criteria. This allows those risk ratings to roll up cleanly to the right component, be it the engagement, subsidiary, or third party, while maintaining the granularity of the risk domain. And yes, even risk intelligence ratings from external providers can be mapped to risk areas, making it possible to integrate external insights into the same roll up structure of a unified third party risk profile. So, in summary, risk area criteria are the configurations that incorporate the risk areas into risk scoring. They make the roll up possible, providing flexibility in how risk is weighted and interpreted, and ensures that your organization evaluates third party risk in a way that's both consistent and aligned with your business priorities. Aggregators of risk rating. Now that we have explored the building blocks, components, risk areas, and their respective criteria, let's talk about the aggregators that bring all of this together. In ServiceNow's third party risk management, aggregators are the risk scoring rules that actual configurations that calculate the risk rating at the specific level using the criteria we have defined. Let's start with the third party risk scoring rule. The aggregator pulls together two This aggregator pulls together two key inputs: component criteria and risk area criteria. Component criteria defines which components to include, such as third party risk assessments, subsidiaries, engagements, and risk intelligence. Risk area criteria determines how to interpret risk across domains like cybersecurity, compliance, or financial health. Only the components included in the component criteria are factored into the rollup. The scoring rule then applies the logic defined in the criteria to aggregate the risk ratings. The risk ratings from these components are aggregated using a weighted average to produce the third party risk rating. Now, let's look at the engagement risk scoring rule, which operates similarly but at the engagement level. It also uses two inputs: engagement component criteria and risk area criteria. Engagement component criteria determines which engagement level components to include, such as engagement risk assessments and element risk assessments, like facilities, products, or principles. Risk area criteria, which again drives the interpretation of risk by domain. Just like with third party risk scoring, only the components defined in the engagement component criteria are included in the rollup. The risk ratings from these components are aggregated using a weighted average that produces engagement risk rating. Now, here's the nuance that we need to be aware of. Each risk scoring rule has an order number. This allows you to set precedents when multiple rules could apply to the same third party, subsidiary, or engagement. The rule with the highest order value takes precedence and will be applied in the risk calculation. This gives you the flexibility to define fallback rules or targeted rules for special cases, which while still maintaining control over which one actually gets used. So, in summary, these two aggregators, the third party risk scoring rule and the engagement risk scoring rule, are the engines that transform all the structured risk data into a meaningful, actionable risk rating, layered, contextual, and aligned to your priorities. In the next couple of slides, we will dig deeper into the calculations of the risk ratings. Calculating engagement risk rating. At the top of this hierarchy is the engagement risk rating, the final value that helps you understand the overall risk posture of a specific engagement. But that rating isn't calculated in isolation. It's the result of a structured roll-up using a configuration called the engagement risk scoring rule. This rule acts as the calculation engine, bringing together two sets of criteria that define how risk data from assessments must be interpreted and aggregated: engagement component criteria and risk area criteria. Starting with engagement component criteria. These criteria define which risk inputs should be considered as part of the engagement and how they should contribute to the roll-up. The two key components here are engagement risk assessments, assessments performed directly on the engagement; element risk assessments, assessments performed on entities that support the engagement, like facilities, products, principal, or other external organizations. Each component has its own scoring method, such as average, min, or max, and a weight that determines its influence on the risk rating of that component. Ultimately, the risk ratings from these components are aggregated using a weighted average. But it's important to note that only those components that are applied to the engagement are included in the calculations. If a particular component is not really evaluated for a engagement, then it is not included in the calculation of weighted average, even if the risk scoring definition applies it. Next, we have the risk area criteria, which guide how the risk is interpreted by domain. These criteria are made up of predefined risk areas like security, compliance, financial risk, etc. Each risk area also has a scoring method and a weight, and they too contribute to the roll-up based on how they are configured in the risk area criteria. So while the engagement component criteria helps identify where the risk is coming from, the risk area criteria help interpret what kind of risk is present. The engagement risk rule ties all of this together. It includes a filter condition which determines which engagements the rule applies to, and an order which ensures that if multiple rules match, the one with the highest order value is executed. Let's clarify what's happening behind the scenes using the footnotes. The scoring method here, average, min, or max, is applied to questionnaire or document request ratings grouped by engagement components, such as assessments or elements. These scores roll up into the overall engagement rating as a weighted average of the components applied by the engagement component criteria. Separately, questionnaires or document request ratings are also grouped and evaluated by risk areas using the same scoring method. These domain-specific insights also roll up to the engagement risk rating. So, in summary, this structure ensures that engagement risks is calculated using a combination of where the risk is sourced via components and what kind of risk it represents via risk areas. This allows for a contextual and highly customizable engagement risk score tailored to your organizational priorities and governance model. Moving on, calculating the third party or subsidiaries risk rating. Now that we have seen how engagement risk ratings are calculated, let's take a look at how risk is rolled up to the third party level using the third party risk scoring rule. At the top of the hierarchy is the third party risk rating. This is the ultimate outcome we are trying to compute. But that rating doesn't come from one place. It's aggregated through two distinct paths: third party risk component criteria and risk area criteria. Let's start with components. ServiceNow supports four predefined components for third party risk: third party risk assessments, VRAs, direct assessments of the vendor, subsidiaries, any organizational branches that are also assessed, engagements, business relationships that the third party is involved in, risk intelligence, scores from external providers that offer insight into financial health, security, reputation, and more. Each component has its own scoring method, such as average, min, or max, and a weight that determines its influence on the risk rating of that component. Ultimately, the risk ratings from these components are aggregated using a weighted average. But it's important to note that only those components that are applicable to the third party are included in the calculations. If a particular component is not really evaluated for a particular third party, then it is not included in the calculation of weighted average, even if it is defined in the risk scoring definition. That brings us to component criteria, which serves as the configuration layer that determines which components should be included in the risk rollup, the weight assigned to each component, and the scoring method, whether that's an average, min, or max of the component ratings. On the other hand, we have risk area criteria, which brings domain level context to the calculation. These criteria allow us to interpret third party risk by domains like security, compliance, financial, or resilience, and configure how much influence each domain has via weights and the aggregation logic using min, max, or average of domain level risk ratings. The third party risk scoring rule then pulls these two criteria, components and risk area, into a unified scoring model. It applies the rule to the appropriate third party based on its filter condition and uses the order value to determine which rule takes precedence if multiple rules match. Let's not forget that the scoring methods define how the data is aggregated. Footnote 1. The scoring method here, average, min, or max, is applied to questionnaire or document request ratings, grouped by third party components such as third party risk assessments, subsidiaries, engagements, and or risk intelligence. These scores roll up into the overall third party rating as a weighted average of the components applied by the third party component criteria. Footnote 2. For risk areas, the method aggregates questionnaires or document request risk ratings by domain. The end result, a comprehensive, structured, and transparent third party risk rating that reflects where the risk is coming from, components, and what kind of risk it is, domains or risk areas. From third party to assessment, decoding risk scoring. This slide serves as a recap for the entire session, capturing all the critical details of what we already reviewed for the scoring methodology. All right, at the bottom of the pyramid, at the bottom of the pyramid, we see question or metric, category, and questionnaire. From a data model standpoint, this is your assessment metric, ASMT underscore metric table. It houses individual questions that belong to a category, ASMT underscore category table, and metric type, metric underscore type. Metric type is basically the questionnaire. For more information, please review the survey and assessments platform capability documentation. Resources are included for your reference later. Question or metric definition. The foundational attributes of the metric definition include data type, min, max, correct, answer. The key scoring related attributes of the metric definition include scored, weight, and scale definition. Scored. All scoreable metrics are scored. When score flag is selected, a metric response is normalized to 0 or 100 based on correct answer configuration. When scored flag is not selected, the calculation blueprint equations EQ1, EQ2, or EQ3 normalize a metric response. Weight is numerical value that represents metric importance relative to other metrics. Scale definition. A value of low means small numerical values indicate positive result. High means large numerical values indicate positive result. Note that the scale definition is only applicable to metrics that have scored flag not checked. Question or metric results. Now let's take a look at the attributes of the table that houses the results when a question or metric is responded to in a questionnaire by the assessor. The key attributes of metric results. ASMT underscore metric underscore result table include past string value, actual value, normalized value. Let me explain. Scale definition for a scored metric influences how scoring calculation determines the question rating, and its impact is cascaded on the question percent contribution and question normalized value. That is normalized value. As a reminder, question rating and question percentage contribution are dynamically calculated values, and it is only the normalized value that is stored for the results among these three calculated values. As for past, string value, actual value, and normalized value, they are pretty straightforward, as you have already guessed from their naming convention. Past. For a scored question, the metric result table stores the result of question response evaluation as passed or failed. Passed value means the question response was favorable. String value that the user gave response for a question. Question of any data type is converted to a string to be stored in this attribute. Example, a date or time response is converted to a string. Actual value. Value obtained from user assessment response to a particular question. This is the designated decimal value for a question response. Example, a list of choices may be choice 1, choice 2, or choice 3, while the actual value, respectively, of these choices may actually be 1, 2, or 3, one of which will be stored based on the user response. Actual value of -1 indicates that the user has not responded to the question, in which case the normalized value should be -1 as well. Normalized value. As a reminder, the normalized value for each question is calculated by multiplying the question rating, question percent contribution, and a constant value of 100. This enables you to compare questions with different weights and ratings. This is the process for metrics when scored flag is not checked. But when the scored flag is checked, then the metric response is normalized to 0 or 100 only based on the correct answer configuration. Moving on. Category. The key attributes of the definition of a category include weight and scoring type. From a data model standpoint, this is your metric category, ASMT underscore metric underscore category table. It houses individual categories that group metric or questions, ASMT underscore metric, and the category itself belongs to metric type, metric underscore type, the questionnaire. Weight is numerical value that represents category importance relative to other categories. Scoring type, percent correct or all or nothing scoring. It generally means either all metrics questions in the category are evaluated or none. But I trust third-party risk management use cases has little to not much use of this attribute, but this attribute may be more appropriate in other generic use cases at the platform level. So please don't worry about it and leave to default percent. Let's look at the attributes of the table that houses the results, where a question or metric in a category are responded to in a questionnaire by the assessor. The key attributes of the assessment category result, ASMT underscore category underscore result table, include risk rating, rating, normalized value, and original risk rating. Rating. Rating is a quantitative metric. The numeric rating is a calculation using all the metric or question results within the specific category. It is a sum of all the normalized values of all the questions within the category and the assessment group specified. Risk rating. Risk rating is a qualitative metric that is a conversion of quantitative attribute rating, just described a moment ago. The risk rating is a lookup on the risk rating scale using the numeric rating of the category. The risk rating scale is defined in the assessment setup. Normalized value. The normalized value of a category is a calculation that is multiplication of category rating, just described a moment ago, and a weighted average of the category weight. The weighted average is a simple equation as you would expect. Category weight divided by sum of all category weights in the questionnaire. I'll repeat it again. Simply put it in a multiplication of category rating and a weighted average of category weight. Original risk rating. The original risk rating, in case the risk rating is overridden by the third-party risk manager, is stored in this attribute for future reference during the assessment. Next, questionnaire instance or document request instance. I'm moving to questionnaire instance or document request instance because questionnaire by itself and the attributes that it supports at the definition level are self-explanatory. Let's look at the attributes of the table that houses the results when a questionnaire is responded to by the assessor. The key attributes of the questionnaire instance, also commonly referred to as an assessment instance, ASMT underscore assessment underscore instance table, include risk score, risk rating, internal risk score, and original risk rating. Risk score. Risk score is a quantitative metric. The numeric rating is a calculation using the category results within the questionnaire. It is a sum of all category normalized values of the questionnaire instance in context. Risk rating. Risk rating is a qualitative metric that is a conversion of the quantitative attribute risk score, just described a moment ago. The risk rating is a lookup on the risk rating scale using the numeric risk score of the questionnaire instance. The risk rating scale is defined in the assessment setup. Internal risk score. The internal risk score on a questionnaire instance is populated only when the assessment is an internal IRQ assessment. Internal IRQs are triggered during the due diligence process. The calculation is weighted average of the sum of all categories normalized values. It has to be rounded up or down to the nearest integer because it is an integer value. This is how the calculation of internal risk assessment or IRQs work, but it has no direct bearing on the risk scoring we are currently discussing as it is for the external assessments. But this one is meant for internal assessments. Original risk rating. The original risk rating, in case of the risk rating is overridden by the third-party risk manager, is stored in this attribute for future reference during the assessment. Risk rating, document request. All right, there's one more rating here, that is risk rating of the document request. It is not derived from any score, but directly derived from how the question, do you have a document, is responded to. Based on the response of the risk rating, Based on the response, the risk rating is updated. All right, moving on. Assessment, third party risk assessment record, VRAs. The third party risk assessment record has the following attributes: risk rating, computed risk rating, overridden risk rating, original risk rating, and issue rating. This is your third party risk assessments table, SN underscore VDR underscore risk underscore ASMT underscore assessment. Risk rating. The risk rating on the third-party risk assessment is for that single assessment only. It is a calculated value. The VRA assessments can be related to a third-party engagement or entity. The VRA record is comprised of one or more questionnaire instances or document request instances. Please note the risk rating attribute on assessment record is referred to as assessment rating in the risk scoring calculations. Therefore, how this is calculated and derived should strictly be observed in the scoring calculations formula only. A key point to note here is that from this point forward, the risk ratings do not use the risk rating scale in assessment setup, but all types of risk ratings, this point going up the pyramid, use risk rating scale in administration, GRC choices, choice category equal to risk rating. The reason for the change in the risk rating scale is simply because the previous rating scale was intended to generate a rating from scores. But this rating scale generates rating from a rating value that is computed from other ratings. Computed risk rating. Computed risk rating is the risk rating that is computed using the assessment rating formula. The computed risk rating, in case the risk rating is overridden by the third-party risk manager, is never altered in this attribute for future reference during the assessment. Overridden risk rating. If the third-party risk manager decides to override the computed risk rating, then it is stored in this attribute. The risk rating updates to now reflect the overridden risk rating. Original risk rating. The original risk rating, in case the risk rating is overridden by the third-party risk manager, is stored in this attribute for future reference during the assessment. Issue risk rating or issue rating. The issue rating is derived from the issue ratings as determined by the third-party risk manager. This attribute has no direct bearing on the risk rating of third-party risk scoring and thus any scoring calculations. Moving on, engagement. Risk rating, this is a calculated and read-only attribute on engagement, SN underscore VDR underscore risk underscore ASMT underscore vendor underscore engagement table. It is the engagement risk scoring rule that applies to the engagement that updates this attribute. More specifically speaking, it is really the engagement component criteria identified by the applicable risk scoring rule that is the compute behind this attribute. Computed risk rating. The computed risk rating, in case the risk rating is overridden by the third-party risk manager, is never altered in this attribute for future reference during the assessment. Overridden risk rating. If the third-party risk manager decides to override the computed risk rating, then it is stored in this attribute. The risk rating updates to now reflect the overridden risk rating. Engagement tier. This attribute is updated by the internal tiering assessment or IRQ. It can be used in a process to determine which assessment should be assigned to the third party at an engagement level. There's a rule as tier-based submission rule that can be leveraged or that can leverage this value to submit assessments to the third party, again at the engagement level. This has no direct bearing on the risk scoring. Third party or subsidiary. Risk rating. This is a calculated and read-only attribute on company or third-party record. It is the third-party risk scoring rule that applies to the company or third party that updates this attribute. More specifically speaking, it is really the third-party risk component criteria identified in the applicable risk scoring rule that is the compute behind this attribute. Computed risk rating. The computed risk rating, in case the risk rating is overridden by the third-party risk manager, is never altered in this attribute for future reference during the assessment. Overridden risk rating. If the third-party risk manager decides to override the computed risk rating, then it is stored in this attribute. The risk rating updates to now reflect the overridden risk rating. Risk intelligence rating. The risk intelligence rating is derived from the risk intelligence scores from the external service providers, and it is converted into qualitative risk rating using the risk rating scale. Assessment risk rating. Assessment risk rating is calculated as already explained for assessment third-party risk assessment record VRA risk rating calculations. Subsidiary risk rating. Subsidiary risk rating is calculated as already explained for the third-party risk rating. This applies the relevant third-party risk scoring rule for deriving the risk rating. Engagement risk rating. Engagement risk rating is calculated as already explained for the engagement risk rating. This applies the relevant engagement risk scoring rule for deriving the risk rating. Business service rating. When a business service is associated with a third party or an engagement, the criticality rating of the business service informs the decision making but does not actually influence the risk scoring calculations as of this recording. Rank tier. This is the type of third party. This attribute is manually set by the third party risk manager based on how they plan to leverage the third party. Out of the box, options include strategic partner, valued partner, tactical supplier, excluded supplier. The options are editable and can be tailored to your needs. Rank tier is often used as a filter in the third-party risk scoring rules to selectively apply component criteria and risk area criteria to the third party. Risk tier. This attribute is manually set by the organization based on its perception of level of risk introduced by the third party to the organization. This helps third-party risk manager prioritize which third parties need the most rigorous monitoring and assessment. If your organization processes are currently manual, we recommend you to utilize this attribute for your tracking and monitoring of the third parties. But if you're utilizing third-party risk scoring rules that automate the risk rating calculations, then that should suffice. Third-party tier. This is attribute which is updated by the internal tiering or assessment, hierarchy assessment. It can be used in a process to determine which assessment should be assigned to the third party. There is a rule known as tier-based submission rule that can leverage this value to submit assessments to the third party. That wraps up decoding risk scoring. The intent of this slide is really to recap all possible critical attributes that aid the risk scoring process and the significance of different rating scales when they are applied, as well as the risk scoring rules where they are applied. Hopefully, this was a useful overview for decoding the risk scoring. All right, it's almost demo time. But before we get in the product demonstration for risk scoring, I'd like to set the stage with a few couple slides that will help you understand the demo flow in general. So let's get started. Let me walk you through the demonstration setup I have prepared to illustrate how risk scoring works in ServiceNow's third-party risk management solution. To start, at the highest level, we have our parent third-party entity, WorkFaster. Under WorkFaster, we have modeled a realistic organizational structure that includes three subsidiaries, Timely, Taskly, and Schedly. WorkFaster has an ongoing engagement A, as you can see. Um, Timely has no ongoing engagements. Taskly has two engagements ongoing, A and B, and Skedi has one engagement ongoing, engagement A. You may be noticing not all assessments are being conducted as part of these ongoing engagements. So some of these assessments are being conducted directly at the third party level. These are assessments that are standing alone and being delivered directly to the third party, and that is okay. In addition, I also have an entity set more. Um, so that is undergoing an assessment, as you can see, element risk assessment over here. As a reminder, all assessments are just third-party risk assessments. They're all just VRAs. Um, but for clarity, I have intentionally named them as engagement or element engagement or element risk assessments, depending on the context. We have also established a layered set of components that reflect the key sources of risk assessments. Third-party components include third-party risk assessments, subsidiaries, engagements, and risk intelligence. We have factored risk intelligence scores for WorkFaster only for this demonstration. Each of these components will contribute to WorkFaster's and subsidiaries' overall risk rating using component criteria within the third-party risk scoring rule. Now coming to engagement components. For engagements, whether tied to WorkFaster or its subsidiaries, we are also risk assessing the engagement layer using these five components: engagement risk assessments, facilities, products, principles, and other. Other is a flexible bucket for additional entities like subcontractors or maybe services. Although this is the setup, I have only utilized products for engagement components, and that is for the entity set more for its risk assessment as part of engagement A. These feed into the engagement component criteria within the engagement risk scoring rule. Regarding risk areas, across both third-party and engagement layers, we are consistently evaluating four risk domains: financial risk, reputational risk, security risk, and anti-bribery and corruption. These risk areas are used in risk area criteria to contextualize what kinds of risks are being measured and how much they influence the final rating. Assessment distribution, here at the bottom, as you can notice, um, the assessment distribution across third party, subsidiaries, engagements, and entity. This setup creates a multi-layered scoring environment that allows us to demonstrate how individual assessments, components, and risk areas contribute to the final consolidated third-party risk rating, and how that can guide better, faster, and more risk-aware decisions. Okay, we have a few more slides to cover for the setup. So to facilitate the assessments, be it at the third party, subsidiary, engagement, or entity, I have configured a generic questionnaire, in this case example one, and replicated this questionnaire to as many risk areas as we will have for our demonstration. You will see in the you'll see in a little bit that we have four risk areas. So I have this questionnaire replicated at least four times. I may have replicated more than once for a particular risk area, but it's still the same questionnaire. The reason why I am using generic questionnaire is because I want you to be able to see how each question that is metric data type contributes to scoring, if you will. As a reminder, we previously discussed in the session that some questions are scoreable and some are not. There's a cheat sheet here. So as a cheat sheet among those that are scoreable, I have captured what the correct answer for that question is. For example, I have a question by the title generic choice, and it has three choices, choice 1, 2, and 3. And if the assessor responds choice 3, then that is the correct answer. Choice 1 and 2 response would be incorrect answer. Likewise, I have the entire cheat sheet for this questionnaire that we are going to be using to create questionnaire or assessment instances. Um, we can review the cheat sheet here. Let me quickly run through this. So again, this is the correct answers cheat sheet. So in section A, we have generic Boolean, checked of course is correct. Number number which runs from 1 through 10, 7 is correct. Section B, we have percentage. 70% is the correct answer. Then we have scale from A, B, C. C is the correct answer, and so on and so forth. I think you get the point. So now moving on, I have only applied scale definition of high to all scoreable questions. As you can notice, the questions are grouped into these various different sections, which are nothing but categories A, B, and C. I also have a unique weightage. So if you look at the metric weight, I have unique weightage assigned to each of these questions as well as the categories. So categories themselves have weightage and the questions as well. One more thing, I have intentionally kept multi-select. So you'll notice we have all types of questions over here. Multi-select is not necessarily in our demonstration configured for correct answer. I've kept this example simple to manage the overall complexity of the questionnaire setup and response, as this data type is a bit more complex in its evaluation of normalized value. Actually, um, honestly speaking, it's slightly more complex in how it stores the results. That's that's the part that we need to understand. Overall approach is still the same. It's basically the compute of resulting normalized value that you will need to understand for multi-select. Please refer to the product documentation to adopt multi-select in your implementation, but more or less, it's still the concept overall is still the same. You can identify what correct answer or answers are for a multi-select type of a question, and then you can see how that kind of like computes the normalized value. As you may have noticed, this questionnaire is heavily configured with questions having scored attributes only. So if I look at scored, um, this is like heavily configured with scored attributes only. Those which are configured as scored equal to true are truly scoreable questions. Those which are marked as scored equal to false are, more generally speaking, not even scoreable. For example, date and time. Um, so now, why is that important for us to understand is because remember that if the scored attribute is set to true, the correct answer configuration yields the normalized value between 0 and 100 only. But we can configure this in another way, and we have a slide for that. So let's go to the next one. So what if the questions are not to be scored? Meaning, like, what does that really mean? It basically means your compute to normalized value is not driven by scored equal to true, which would yield a 0 or 100, but is actually driven purely by scale definition of high or low. That that yields a more precise normalized value than just a 0 or 100. So this is so in this example, what you can see is the score for all of this, or all of the questions is marked as false. So basically, this is the scale definition that will kind of like dictate the normalized value determination, if you will. We'll see that in a little bit. So in this example, the example 2 has no questions, which has the scored value is equal to true. It's false for each and every question. The normalized value for these questions will be specifically derived using the equations EQ1, EQ2, or EQ3 from the calculation blueprint that we reviewed um, a while ago. So it's the calculation blueprint that kind of like is invoked, if you will. Those equations are invoked to derive the normalized value, as opposed to just being 0 or 1, 0 or 100. Hence, the correct answer configuration is not relevant in this type of a setup. And we have one example questionnaire that we actually have uh, a couple of example questionnaires that have been set up for the purposes of the demo. Okay, so obviously the correct answer cheat sheet is not applicable when scored is equal to false. The rest of the configurations are very much the same. So with that, we will quickly review the roles and then dive into the demo. So let's move on to the next slide. So from the ServiceNow roles perspective, as we dive deeper into third-party risk scoring, it's important to understand who's actually involved in configuring and managing these activities, right? This slide highlights two key personas in the process, the TPRM manager and the TPRM assessor. Let's start with TPRM manager. Their role is broad and strategic. They're responsible for managing third parties, subsidiaries, and engagements, overseeing the assessment process, and maintaining the overall third party setup. And this includes handling no-code configurations within the platform, such as setting up the risk scoring, scales, if you will, setting up the risk intelligence, ensuring the scoring process is aligned with the organizational needs. Next, while we have the third-party TPRM assessor, While their scope is slightly narrower, their responsibilities still involve managing third parties, subsidiaries, and engagements, and assisting with third party risk assessments. They play a hands on role in executing and reviewing assessments that contribute to the overall risk ratings. Now, from a risk scoring perspective, it's important to note that both these roles can perform the same actions. Okay. While it's performing no code configurations such as setting up the definitions, the questionnaires, configuring the criteria, or defining the risk scoring rules, both the TPRM manager and assessor have access and permissions to do it all. They also they're also able to view risk scores and ratings across all levels, giving them the complete visibility into how the third-party risk is being evaluated and how the rating is being rolled up. So while the titles might differ slightly in scope, but they are more from a process perspective, how they would really be engaged, that might be different. Both these roles are fully equipped to drive the risk scoring methodology forward. So with that, let's quickly jump into the demo in the instance and investigate in detail. So as you can see, we have the third party work faster, and it has the subsidiaries, timely, taskly, and schedule. These are basically your subsidiaries as your component. The third party work faster itself has an assessment called as, which is a component third party risk assessment. You see that over here. It also has engagement and risk intelligence. Okay, so now how this is laid out is basically for the third party itself, work faster. This is the assessment we have, and here is the engagement. Looking at the other third parties, we have timely. Timely has an assessment, as you can see, third party risk assessment. Here's the component. This is the assessment of the third party timely. Taskly has two components, third party risk assessment and engagement. Here in the screenshot, you see that it has a third party risk assessment, as well as there are actually more than one assessment, and you have two engagements. Now, looking at Skiddy, Skiddy has third party risk assessment and engagement as well. So it has one third party risk assessment and one engagement. Now, the engagements themselves are broken down into several different components, respectively, which are like your engagement components, right? So before we look into that, so overall, what we are looking at is how do these components come together in terms of deriving the risk rating for work faster, and how do these components individually at the subsidiary level come together for deriving the risk ratings of these subsidiaries, right? So now let's look at, for example, Skiddy. Skiddy has one assessment and has one engagement. And the engagement itself has engagement risk assessment, one of the components, and the other is element risk assessment. As we look at Taskly, Taskly is slightly different in how it has been executed. So Taskly has two assessments and two engagements, and engagement A has engagement risk assessment, and engagement B also has an engagement risk assessment. So the only component in the engagements under Taskly is engagement risk assessment. This is for the engagements, right? So this is our overall structure. The legend over here indicates the rating scale from one very high through one very low with these different color codes. Our goal with the demo is to understand how do we arrive with these respective ratings, at the assessment level at the subsidiary level, um, and ultimately at the third-party work faster level. We'll also see how these are kind of like broken down by different risk areas, if you will, in each of these different components, like specifically from a third party and subsidiary perspective, and also from the perspective of engagements. So with that, we'll quickly jump into the instance over here. So what we have here is basically the third party, which is timely. I have begun at the workspace over here, navigated to list, and all third parties, and I found timely. What we can see that the risk rating of timely is 3 moderate. It also has basically only one component, that is third-party risk assessments, which is again 3 moderate. And then it has these risk areas which are having various different risk ratings. Okay, so how this all comes together is what we will now begin investigating. So let us navigate to the third-party record in the native view. So I have opened up the third-party record in the native view. The reason for that is I want to know what is the third-party risk scoring rule that is applied to the third-party timely, and that happens to be Trailblazer rule. Okay, so the Trailblazer rule, if I open the Trailblazer rule, which I have opened it in a new tab already, it has, so again, the Trailblazer rule is the brains behind the calculation of the third-party risk rating. Um, so it basically has the third-party risk component criteria, and the risk area criteria. So remember that it's the component criteria that matters the most in terms of like calculating the rating itself, and how the rating is kind of like portrayed is basically from a different domain perspective is your risk area criteria. So looking at the component criteria, we have these different components, and all of the components have been factored in, and they have different weightages, third-party risk assessments, engagements, subsidiaries, and risk rating. Okay, so these are the components that are applied to timely, and these are the risk area criterias. Again, financial, reputational, security, and anti-bribery, and they all have different weights. So first, let's investigate um, components, right? So now that we have seen these are the components that are applied, these are the different um, weightages and scoring methods for each individual component. Meaning, if there were multiple risk assessments, they would have been averaged, right, as per the scoring method. Likewise for engagements and so on and so forth, right? But we know for timely, we know that there's only one component, that is third-party risk assessment. So that is the only component that system has to factor in. So really the weighted average here um, does not even matter as much. There's only one component here. So it's basically that's kind of like fully applied to your risk rating, if you will, right? So we see that the component itself has this risk rating of 3 moderate. That has resulted in the risk rating of the third-party record itself to be of the third-party record timely to be 3 moderate, right? So now that we have understood that portion, basically, we have seen how the component criteria was applied. We have seen that the scoring method is average risk. In this case, there is only one component. So our conclusion basically is that's the risk rating of the third party. Now let's investigate the assessments. That is the only component, right? So if we investigate the assessments, of course, it's not a surprise that the risk rating of the assessment has to be 3 moderate. Okay, so as you look at the risk rating of the assessment, uh, you know, what we need to understand is how is this risk rating derived? If you recall, and again, you might have to go back and check the calculations blueprint, but really just as a quick reminder, it kind of like um, is an average of the questionnaires and document requests. So questionnaires and document request per risk area. And it's basically a a weighted average of all of that, right? So what that means is, so let us take one at a time over here. So if we take, for example, ABAC, so for ABAC, the questionnaires have resulted into the risk ratings of five very low and three moderate. So the average of that would be, 5 plus 3 is equal to 8. So the average really turns out to be 4, right? So remember that that is your average for ABAC, right? So 4. Now 4 basically means it is low. So if I look at third-party risk areas, this is the risk rating for low. So likewise, if I look at financial risk, so financial is 4 low and 1 very high, so that is 5. That is 2.5. That becomes again 3 moderate. It is always rounded up. So it becomes like beyond zero point 0.5. So it is rounded up. So it becomes like 3 moderate as well. So if I look at financial risk, that is 3 moderate. Now looking at reputational risk, that is going to be 1.5, gets rounded up, 1 plus 2 by 2, so gets rounded up. 1.5 gets rounded up, it becomes like too high. So that's your reputational, right? And last but not the least is security. So it is 2 plus 5, that is 7. But again, remember there is a document request here that we had tagged to the security area, so that is 2. So it's basically 2 plus 5 plus 2. So that is 9. And the average of that is 9 by 3. That becomes 3 moderate, right? So that is your security. So 3 moderate. Now the formula for deriving the assessments risk rating that we see over here, 3 moderate, is basically taking the weighted average of these computations of this risk rating, if you will, right? So you can see the weight over here, you can see the rating over here, right? So basically 10 multiplied by 4, 30 multiplied by 2, and 40 multiplied by 3, and 20 multiplied by 3. So whatever that comes to, divided by the sum of weights, which is going to be 100. In this case, it is 100. It can always be more or less. It doesn't matter. In this case, it is 100, right? So this computation, 4 multiplied by 10 is 40, 2 multiplied by 30, 60. So that becomes like your 100. This is 120 becomes 220. And then this is this is 60. So it becomes 280. 280 divided by 100 becomes like 2.8, always rounded up. So that is 3 moderate. So now that comes to 3 moderate. So this is how the assessments risk rating was derived. And it is the assessments risk rating that is basically your component in this case that that is kind of like a 3 moderate over here, right? And based on the component criteria, it's ideally a weighted average. Now in this case, basically there is only one component, so it just turns out to be 3 moderate for timely. So what we have kind of like gone through so far over here is we understood the bigger picture of the risk rating, at the third party liquid level, at the component level, and we also kind of like dwelt deeper into how does the risk rating get calculated for this component third party risk assessment. It's only one assessment, so that is what we investigated. And we also understood how the risk areas were kind of like determined for this particular assessment. And when they roll up, there's only one assessment. So that is what you would see at the third party level as well. What we did not thus far investigate is how are these individual questionnaire ratings themselves being calculated. That is something we will investigate in a little bit, but that's a high level of how the calculations have kind of like been tallied up for the third party timely. So with that, we will continue with this and investigate some other third parties, and then ultimately go deeper dive into how these questionnaire ratings are derived. All right. We are off to our next third party, which is Taskly. For Taskly, we are going to review how the risk rating for Taskly is derived by understanding how the risk, by understanding the component risk ratings, and how they are basically being leveraged. We'll also understand the risk area computations. Um, just for the information from a demo perspective, this is part of a due diligence request. It has two third-party risk assessments, and there are two engagements. We will introspect one of the engagements, which is engagement A. We are not going to get into details around the questionnaires because we already did that with respect to time B. So it's going to be more or less the same. So at this time, our interest is more to understand how the ratings kind of like are bubbling up for Taskly at that level by leveraging the components, and how do the risk areas align. We'll probably even experiment changing some of the criterias, their configurations on the fly, and see how that changes the computation. So with that, let's get into the demo. All right, so what we have here on screen is Taskly. So I have already opened this record by navigating to the list. What we are looking at is the Taskly is having risk rating of too high. Looking at the components, the engagement has the risk rating too high, and third-party risk assessment too high as well. So now our goal here is to understand how did these ratings kind of like come to fruition. So looking at Taskly, again, the native record, I'm able to identify that the rule that is applied here, the third-party risk rating rule, is Trailblazer rule. Again, remember Taskly has engagements as well. So from an engagement perspective, um, what I am seeing is Taskly has like two engagements, A and B. In engagement A, it uses the spearhead rule, which is again the engagement risk rating rule. Engagement B as well uses the same rule, spearhead rule. So now that we know what rules are third party and the engagement, Taskly and engagements A and B are using respectively, let's introspect the ratings and apply those rules, right? So components again, too high for each engagement and third party. For the Trailblazer rule, there is this new component criteria that the Trailblazer rule uses. So we are investigating that component. Again, all the components are applied. These two are relevant. The risk scoring method is average risk of engagements and third-party risk assessments for either of them, right? So again, coming back over here, if I navigate to engagements, I see the engagement risk ratings respectively is 3 and 1. So 3 plus 1 will be 4, by 2 is going to be 2. So for the engagement, it is too high. Looking at the assessments, it is 1 very high and 3 moderate for these assessments respectively. Again, 1 plus 3 divided by 2 is equal to 2. So that's your too high for the third-party risk assessments. Now, how the computation for this works is this is now going to be a weighted average in terms of this translating to a risk rating. So what that means is it's basically 2 multiplied by 30, which is 60, and 2 multiplied by 40, which is 80. Sum of those divided by the sum of the weights. So 60 plus 80, 140 divided by sum of the weights, which is 70. So that 140 by 70 is equal to 2. That translates into the risk rating of too high. So that is how the components, their weighted average is taken to derive the risk rating. Again, the scale was applied. Um, the scale here being, well, as we wrap up, we'll take a look at the scales as well, but that is how this kind of like pans out. Let's look at the risk areas as well. So we have to see how this computation has come together. So what I'm going to do is here just duplicate this because I want to pull up the risk areas for individual components. So I'm going to now navigate to the third-party components. We'll pull up engagements, and then we'll navigate to third-party risk areas. We will again go to third-party components. We will now pull up third-party risk assessments. We'll go to third-party risk areas. Okay, so we'll take one or two examples here. So let's say to start with, we'll start with reputational risk, let us say. So too high, and this is for the engagements, and it is for low for third-party risk assessments. So 2 plus 4 is 6. Again, it's an average. So that becomes like 3. So we'll see that reputational is 3 moderate. Okay. There's an interesting example here, which is anti-bribery. So notice that it is too high. Okay. So coming back over here for anti-bribery, it is 4 low and it is 1 high. So that is basically 5. 5 by 2 is 2.5. Becomes like a 2. Right? So that's how it works when it comes to roll-ups. Let's take another example as we look at this. So let's take security. So security is 3. Over here it is 5. So that becomes 8. So 8 by 2 becomes 4. So security is 4 low. So that's how it works out. Now, having reviewed this, let's take a look at the engagements. So we'll start with we'll just look at one engagement here. Okay, so we'll look at engagement A. In terms of like the risk ratings, this is 3 moderate. There are 2 assessments in this and 2 high and 4 low. So 2 plus 4 is 6 divided by 2 because it's an average. It comes to 3 moderate. All right. So now we have been reviewing all of this, but our methodology, widely speaking, has been average. What if that changes? So we're going to go back to Taskly, and what if that changes, and what are our options, right? So let's say if I look at Taskly, we have these 2 components, engagements and third-party risk assessments. Let's go to let's go to assessments over here. Okay, for the assessments, 1 very high and 3 moderate. All right, so instead of an average, if the criteria is max, so in the third party component criteria, instead of this being average, if this is max, how would this change? So we go back to Taskly. We kind of like recalculate the risk rating, if you will. And as we recalculate the risk rating, again, in assessments, right, we want to take the max. Okay, so I'm going to come in over here, and so it's taken the max. It's taken 1 very high because we had the assessments, 1 very high and 3 moderate. So instead of an average, it has taken 1 very high. Same thing you could do for engagements as well. So if you went to engagements, and let's say the engagement assessments, should be 1 very high, then should be a max. Uh, Instead of an average, you change that in the component criteria. So now we made that change for the engagement. So if you navigate back, we go to the engagements. So currently it is 3 moderate. Looking at the assessments, it is 2 high and 4 low. So for that update to occur, we again need to recalculate the risk ratings. Then we navigate to engagements, and we are simply just going to reload this. So as we reload, this changes to too high. That's because it has taken the max of these assessments, too high and 4 low. So that's how the changes in the criteria is like play out. And I think pretty much so what we had covered so far include in Taskly, we have covered, so going back over here, we have covered how the risk rating has been derived by using the components, how the risk ratings kind of like roll up at the third party level from beneath those components as well. And we kind of like introspected a little bit the engagement A, if you will. That's pretty much for this section. Let's see what we have to cover next. All right, we are off to our next third party, that is Skedi. So for Skedi, the setup is some setup or really the results is somewhat like this. It has third-party risk assessment as one of the components, engagement as the other one. Um, at the third-party risk assessment, it is at the third-party level. So you see it over here. It has an engagement A. So point to be noted here is that this engagement has an engagement risk assessment and an element risk assessment. So all of this together kind of roll up into your components. So third-party risk assessment here, this rolls up into this component. For engagement, it is determined from these two. At the engagement level, the components are defined to be engagement risk assessment and element risk assessment. So then you get the result that is creating for engagement. Okay, so that is what we are going to review. This is a slightly different setup compared to what we have reviewed for timely and taskly. Timely, we only had one assessment. For taskly, we had third-party risk assessment, and we had engagements, but notice for engagements, we had only engagement risk assessments. Here, the difference is we also have an element risk assessment in the mix. So we're just going to look at that. There's nothing new that we are going to learn from the perspective of how timely and taskly were computed, but it's just a different dimension that we're introducing. So going back to Skedi. So to start with, these are the components, engagements, and third-party risk assessments. The engagement component has 3 moderate, and third-party risk assessment has 4 low. So 3 moderate multiplied by the weight 30, that is 90, and 4 low multiplied by the weight 40 is 160. So that comes around 250. 250 when divided by, again, it's a weighted average, so you're going to divide 250 by 70. So when 250 is divided by 70, because it's 30 plus 40, that's your 70, that's coming to be 3.57. That becomes a 4 low. So the risk rating turns out to be 4 low. So having covered the components now, let's introspect a little bit about areas. So what's interesting is if you navigate to the components, you will see that there are 2 components now, as we discussed. Um, sorry, so that's really the engagements and third-party risk assessments. But if you navigate to the now, so we are supposed to be reviewing the risk areas of these 2 components, right? Which is what gets plotted over here. So what's interesting is if you navigate to the engagement risk areas, basically for this component that we just looked at, this component engagements. So if I drill down into this, this is what is going to show up for the risk areas, right? So as I'm drilling down into that, for engagement A, these are the risk areas. But then apart from the engagement, we have the assessment as well. So for the assessment, if you drill down into it and look at the risk areas, these are the risk areas. But there's one more dimension within the engagement that kind of like rolls into it, because remember that engagement had also the element risk assessment, right? So engagement actually has 2 dimensions to it. One is engagement risk assessment, the other is element risk assessment. So we need to also open up the element risk assessment. This is for set more. and kind of like be ready with the third-party risk areas for that, right? The way you access that is through your due diligence request. Remember that the engagement, the assessments carried out for the entity is at the due diligence record level as opposed to the engagement itself, but it is still in the boundaries of the engagement in terms of how the assessment is carried out, because it does apply to the entity, but it is part of the engagement. So what I mean is, if I were navigating, let us say, to the engagement itself. So if I, let's say, make a copy of this, okay, and I am within the engagement. If I look at the assessment, and I look at the ones that are closed, um, this is the engagement assessment. It has the rating. This is not the engagement, and this is not the entity assessment. It is basically an assessment for collecting the entities itself. It's collect elements. This is not risk rated. You're just doing a collection. But once you complete the collection, then you send out the assessment for the entity within the due diligence record. This is what it is, right? You send out an assessment for the entity within the due diligence record. This is part of the third-party engagement A. Therefore, it is still accounted within the engagement from a roll-up perspective. Okay, so that's the key point to note here in terms of how the third-party schedule will now perform its calculations. So now let us start with looking at the risk area anti-bribery. So here for anti-bribery for third-party assessment, I think we also have to look at the engagement itself. So for engagement, anti-bribery 4 low, and then for here also we have 4 low for assessment, and then we have 5 very low. So it's basically 4 plus 5, which is basically 13. So it's 4 plus 4 plus 5, 13 divided by, it's going to be an average. So 3. So that's your 4.3. So for anti-bribery, if we navigate back over here, it's coming to 4 low because 4.3 is basically 4. So it's 4 low. That is how it has computed the risk areas. Likewise, if we take any other example under SCEDI, if we take, for example, reputational, so it is like 3 moderate, reputational over here is 2. So 3 plus 2, and then again 1. So 3 plus 2 plus 1 is going to be 6, divided by 3 is going to be 2. So for reputational, it is too high. So that's how the roll-up is happening at the risk areas level. We already reviewed as to how the computation of the risk rating is happening considering the components. We have reviewed the computation of how these components individually derive the risk ratings when we reviewed timely. So I think we have kind of like covered the ground over here in terms of overall how the computation works. I think as we are headed towards our next third party, which is the parent third party, work faster, we will review the overall computation again, and then we are going to look at how the assessment level computations work, because that is what we haven't yet covered. So we'll be covering that with work faster. So off to the next one. All right, moving on with work faster. That's the parent third party, parent of timely, taskly, and schedule. So notice that the components of work faster include third-party risk assessment. So there is an assessment on the third-party work faster itself. Subsidiaries, which is what we just reviewed, timely, taskly, and schedule. Engagement, it has an engagement A, and risk intelligence. So risk intelligence is just a risk intelligence score that we have readily available in our demo data. that is what is also included as one of as the component. Um, so with this, the risk areas kind of like derived from various different components, um, as the risk areas kind of roll up from how the risk areas have panned out from those individual components. They are also plotted, but I think we have already investigated risk areas in quite a depth, so we are not going to review that. So navigating back to the instance, what we see here is work faster. So work faster has again these components, all of the four components, subsidiaries being three moderate, so three multiplied by the weight, three multiplied by 20 is your 60. Third-party risk assessments is 80, and this is 30, and this is 10. So 60 plus 80 is basically 140, um, plus 30 plus 10. So 150, 160, 170, 180. 180 divided by sum of all these weights is equal to like 100. So 180 by 100 is 1.8. That comes to your too high. So that's your risk rating. Now let's look at the individual subsidiaries themselves, right? So timely is three moderate. So basically, if you take an average of this two, right? So 3 plus 2 plus 4 is basically 9 divided by 3, should be again 3 moderate. So subsidiaries comes to 3 moderate. So that is how the calculation of subsidiaries worked out. And again, all of this is, as explained previously, defined in the third-party risk scoring rule. So for work faster, it uses Trailblazer as well. In Trailblazer, if we investigate the component criteria, it's all currently set to average. Therefore, the subsidiaries were also averaged out, 9 by 3 to 3 moderate. So that's what we reviewed. We have reviewed risk areas significantly with all the previous third-party examples. So I think we are good over there. And just point to be noted here is risk intelligence rating was, um, sort of like curated from these scores that were derived from these different risk intelligence providers. As you can see at the bottom, the rating kind of like worked out to be one very high. We are not going to review how that rating has been calculated. This is just our demo data. We are just assuming that the risk intelligence rating of one very high was derived for work faster. Feel free to review one of our speed learning sessions around risk intelligence to understand how the risk intelligence works and how the scores are determined. But for the purposes of this recording, for the speed learning, we know that the risk intelligence one very high was derived for work faster. That's our demo data. Okay, so that pretty much covers what we have planned to as far as um, understanding how the risk ratings are derived for timely, taskly, steady, and work faster. We focused more heavily on how the components um, are contributing to the risk area risk rating calculations, and how the risk areas roll up from their own individual components when the risk areas are calculated for those, how they roll up at the third party level. Um, and for timely, more specifically, we have kind of taken a deeper dive into the assessment itself, and we understood how the ratings were, how these ratings came into being, and led to the calculation of the third-party risk assessment rating. So with that, we have only one more thing to introspect, is how the individual questionnaires themselves kind of like derive the rating. So this is the portion that we focused on from an assessment perspective so far. Now we are going to dig a little bit into, okay, how do these individual questionnaires themselves come up with the rating? So we are going to now introspect those individual questionnaires next, which pretty much should then cover the risk scoring demonstration that we intended to. All right, for our final portion of the demo, we are going to be focusing on going a little bit more deeper dive into an assessment result itself. So our focus here is going to be looking at two different types of questionnaires. Um, let's take the example of ABAC. So ABAC has, I have configured two different types of questionnaires here for ABAC, which is your domain or the risk area. In this questionnaire, which is example, notice that scored is true across the board. So when a attribute is scored across the board, um, the evaluation of that result is always 0 or 100 when it comes to question rating. So going back to our anatomy of risk rating real quick, in the calculations blueprint, these equations, EQ1, EQ2, and EQ3 are pretty much like not really applicable when the scored is equal to true, in which case it just evaluates the question rating, if you will, to a 0 or 100, and then it kind of like multiplies it by the weight of the question, the weighted average value of the question to come up with the normalized value. So that is how the first assessment works. With regards to the second assessment in our example, another example, scored value is false across the board. And when it is false, the way the calculation blueprint works is that it accounts for equation 1, 2, and 3 as it is described here in the calculation blueprint. So it does calculate the question rating, then come up with the question percentage contribution, and then ultimately derives the normalized value. And again, as a reminder, question rating and question percentage contribution are not stored in the database. What is stored is the normalized value. So this is what we are about to investigate. Let's take a quick tour of this. So with this example, I have created an assessment. I believe the example is this one. All right. So with this example, I've created an assessment. So let's investigate that first. In terms of metric results, now based on how I have responded, every single question has passed. If it has passed, the evaluation basically it is like 100. So among 0 and 100, the evaluation of the question rating is, or really the normalized value is 100. But then it applies the weighted average of the question itself. So the the weight of generic Boolean, number, and choice must be respectively 20, 30, and 50. So if we look at this, we can see generic Boolean weight is 20, choice is 50, and number is 30. So basically, if the evaluation of this normalized value was really 100, um, then the system has applied weighted average to it, and the result of the ultimate or the end normalized value is basically 20. In this case, it is 30 because the weight is 30. So 100 multiplied by 30 by 100 basically comes to 30. Same thing for this. So this is 50 multiplied. So the evaluation was 100, 0 to among 0 and 100, the evaluation was 100. So 100 multiplied by weighted average 50 by 100 is 50. So this is how the normalized values were calculated. Now, if you look at the assessment category results, the assessment category ratings here is basically a cumulative sum. So that's your category rating. So it's basically um, 20, 30, 50 all added together. So in this case, it comes to 100 for each of these categories A, B, and C. Now, what that comes to for your assessment is a pretty straightforward risk score of 100. So that's basically your category rating multiplied by category weight and sum of all category weights. That's basically your normalized value. And this is going to be sum of all your normalized values coming to 100. So in this case, let's track this back again. So your category rating is equal to sum of all normalized values, which we saw in here. So 20, 30, and 50. Now, category normalized value is again, category weight. So category rating multiplied by weighted average of category. So it's basically 30 by 100. So that's your weighted average. So basically 100 is your category rating multiplied by category weight is 30. So it's a weighted average. So 30 by 100. So 100 multiplied by 30 by 100 is equal to 30. So you see the normalized values of these categories coming to 30, 50, and 20 respectively. That is sum, and that's your category score of 100 again. Now category score of 100 is very low, and that is based on the risk rating scale. So remember that the risk rating scale that is used over here is the risk rating scale under assessment setup. So yeah, we just went to third-party risk management, assessment setup, risk rating scale, and between 80 to 100, the value should be 5, very low. That's how the risk rating has been derived. So we'll close this. Now let's look at another example over here. So in this case, this is the example we are going to look at. So here is the example. I have responded to this assessment as well. This was configured to not really use scored equal to true method of evaluating a single metric, right? It uses scored equal to false. It basically normalizes value using the calculation blueprint. So we'll take one or two examples over here. So let's take this one. So the actual value here is 8. So if I do apply this calculation blueprint, and also let us note the weight of this because we are going to be needing that. So let's start with the calculation blueprint. So if you look at the calculation blueprint, the value 8, the minimum value of number is 1. So 8 minus 1, 7. Maximum is 10. 10 minus 1, 9. So 7 by 9. So this is what we get. So over here for number 7 by 9 is what we just got. So taking a quick note of that, 7 by 9. Now the weight of this question is going to be important for us to know. So this is section A for number. The weight, again, the minimum and maximum 1 and 10 as we computed, the weight is 30. So getting back over here, so it's basically as per the calculation blueprint. Now we got to derive the quotient percentage contribution. So that is 30 by sum of all the weights is 100. So now we have quotient rating as 7 by 9, quotient percentage contribution as 30 by 100. To derive the normalized value, we're going to multiply that by 100. So that's equal to 7 by 9 multiplied by 30 by 100 multiplied by 100. That should be 7 by 9 multiplied by 30. That should be 7 3 is 21, 210 divided by 9. So that would come to approximately 210 divided by 9 will come to 23.33. And this is exactly the normalized value that we derived. So that is how the calculation works. Let's take another example. We'll go with percentage. So in case of percentage, 1 to 100 is the range. The response here is 80. So again, 80 is your value. So 80 so let's again look at the calculation blueprint here. So value is 80, minimum value is 1. So 80 minus 1 by maximum value is 100 minus minimum value is again 1. So this will be 79 by 99. And the weight of this question is going to be important. So let's look at the weight of percentage. weight of percentage is 20. So coming back over here, that is 20 by 100. So that's the weighted average, and then multiplied by 100. Again, going back to the calculation blueprint. So what we got for question rating is 79 by 99, multiplied by question percentage contribution is 20 by 100, and multiplied by 100, the constant value 100. So that becomes 79 by 99 multiplied by 20. That basically becomes, so if I look at the calculator, so 79 multiplied by 20 divided by 99, that comes to 59.95, which is what we have over here. It's basically 59.96. So this is how the calculations work out for normalized value. Now, when it is scored, it works differently. When scored is equal to 2, the answer for the question rating is basically 0 or 100, and then it takes a weighted average and applies that to it, which is what we saw in this particular example. In this example, what we saw is that it uses calculation blueprint to derive the normalized values. So let's complete this. So navigating to the assessment category result. Again, so it's basically sum of normalized values here. So for section A, it should be around 73. Section B, adding 60, 76 approximately. And this is 9. This is basically 10 minus 1. So that's basically 9. And then the system derives the normalized values, again, based on the calculation blueprints. The normalized value is going to be category rating multiplied by category weight by sum of category weights. So that is how it kind of like derives this. So if you take 73, so 73 is the category rating. Category weight is 30. By sum of category weights is 100. So 30 by 100 is 0.3. The 73 multiplied by 0.3 is what we need. So 73 multiplied by 0.3 is approximately is 21.9. So that's your normalized value at the category level. Now, when it comes to the assessment rating, it's basically sum of all the category scores at the normalized value scores. So adding all of these scores, you would get 62. And now if you go back to the rating scale, risk rating scale, and we look at 62, it would fall between 60 and 79. That should be 4 low, and that is what the rating of the assessment is. So one key call out here for the assessment rating, questionnaire category, questionnaire, and assessment, the rating scale is what is under assessment setup. For the roll-ups, it is under administration, the rating scale under administration is used. So if you go to choices, and then you look at risk rating, this is the rating scale that would be used for roll-ups beyond assessments. So with that, we have pretty much covered everything that we planned to. We have taken a deeper dive look at how the risk scoring works. Just to conclude, this is how we have reviewed this. We have gone through timely, taskly, and schedule, reviewed the components. We have reviewed the risk areas at a component level. We have reviewed, for timely third-party risk assessments. For taskly, we focused on an engagement. So we reviewed the engagement level risk assessments. And for schedule, we focused on the engagement level as well. We reviewed the engagement risk assessments and element risk assessments. And then finally, we computed how all of these risk ratings are derived for timely, for taskly, and for schedule, and ultimately for work faster, considering all of these components. We also reviewed the risk area computations for various of these third parties, and we did review when it comes to the third-party risk assessment. We did a deeper dive with regards to how a particular questionnaire rating is calculated, and we also understood what it means for a question to be marked as scored versus not scored, and what sort of calculations are reinforced when a question is scored. So with that, we conclude the third-party risk scoring demo. Let's move on to the next topic. Okay. Hopefully, the demonstration of the third-party risk scoring was informative. Additionally, we have gathered for you a few helpful resources that you should dig deeper into to support your implementation. We will drop the links to these resources alongside the community page so you can access them. All right, as we wrap up today's session, let's take a step back and summarize the core concepts we have explored. Risk scoring isn't just a technical feature. It's the engine that powers confident, data-driven decisions across your entire third-party risk program. Here are the key takeaways. Built-in risk scoring empowers consistency and confidence. ServiceNow's out-of-the-box risk scoring framework provides a repeatable, transparent method for evaluating risk scores across third parties, subsidiaries, engagements, and entities. Structured methodology ensures traceability. If you recall, risk scores flow from individual metrics, categories, to questionnaires and assessment, following the MCQA methodology that we laid out, ensuring a layered and auditable scoring approach. Risk ratings roll up through powerful aggregators. Risk scoring rules at the third party and engagement levels aggregate data using respective component criteria and risk area criteria configurations that determine what's included, how it's weighted, and how it's scored. Components and risk area criteria bring clarity. Components define where the risk is coming from, that is, your assessments, subsidiaries, engagements, risk intelligence, whereas risk areas define what kind of risk is present. Example, security, compliance, financial, etc. Each can be weighted and customized to reflect your organizational priorities. Risk scoring is configurable by design and scalable in practice. You can easily tailor risk rating scales, risk scoring definitions, criterias, weights, and scoring rules. The aggregators giving you full control while supporting enterprise scale and complexity. Out of the box framework fits diverse needs. The standard setup supports a range of use cases, whether you are evaluating a single vendor or managing a complex ecosystem of third parties, subsidiaries, and engagements, whether you are including risk intelligence from external providers. And last but not the least, enables confident and defensible decisions. With a transparent scoring model and structured roll-ups, stakeholders from risk assessors to executives can make better, faster decisions based on consistent risk insights. In short, ServiceNow's risk scoring capabilities elevate your third-party risk program, bringing structure, scale, and strategy together in a unified platform. Whether you use it out of the box or tailor it to your needs, it is a powerful way to transform how your organization understands and acts on third-party risk. As you apply what we have covered today, remember that guidance is available through ServiceNow product documentation and Now Create. And if you run into any recurring technical challenges, do not hesitate to engage your ServiceNow administrator to determine if additional support is required through a support ticket. With that, we'll wrap up over here. Thank you for attending the session on third-party risk scoring. Hopefully, this was helpful and a deeper dive that you were looking for. And feel free to reach out to us in case you need any assistance. Thanks.